She's doing a CIA informational video.
Weird.
An acting gig, or is this something else?
Perhaps. Or, but even so, you're doing an acting gig for the CIA. Who calls you for that?
Yeah.
She was literally a registered actress and starred in a reality TV show, a romance one at that. He met her on a trip to Israel.
No.
There's a video of her making demon eyes, and every time she makes the eyes, the music. It's so ridiculous.
Possessed.
And to the students,
In case you missed it,
and to the students,
Erika Kirk is erupting into full-blown damage control mode after Joe Rogan detonated a revelation so explosive it's shaking everything she's tried to keep buried, her alleged handler training and shadowy intelligence connections. And instead of denying it, she escalates. Not quietly, not carefully. She goes straight for the threat. Her warning? Chilling. Direct. She claims Joe could lose his entire podcast if he dares to say her name again. But that raises a far more dangerous question. Who exactly does Erika Kirk believe she is? Because people don't just throw around threats like that, not at someone with Joe Rogan's reach, unless they believe they're untouchable. Unless they know something the public doesn't. Or worse, unless someone powerful is standing behind them, making sure no consequences ever land. So now the real story isn't just about what Joe exposed, it's about the invisible shield around Erika. Who's backing her? Who's funding her? And how has she managed to repeatedly mislead the public, intimidate high-profile voices, and still walk away without ever being seriously challenged? Joe didn't stop at the surface. He went deeper. Way deeper. Down a rabbit hole that only gets darker the further you go. And now he's not alone. He's teaming up with Candace Owens, and together, they're pulling at threads Erika never expected anyone to touch. What they're uncovering isn't just uncomfortable. It's something Erika has been desperately trying to keep hidden.
The round that he was supposedly shot with was a 30-06, which is a big round. That's a round that you kill a moose with.
Uh-huh.
And it doesn't even have an exit wound.
Right.
It don't make no sense. It makes zero sense.
All right. So, in case you missed the recent episode of Joe Rogan's show with comedian Mark Norman, it was pretty wild. Up until now, Joe didn't comment too much on Erika and all the allegations that surfaced about her since Charlie's assassination. But it looks like Joe couldn't hold it in anymore, and he and Mark went scorched earth on Erika, calling her psycho and alleging there's more to rumored CIA ties than what we saw in those leaked videos. Joe called Erika odd, and he brought up that creepy thing she does with her eyes in interviews and described it as demonic.
Duck.
She's a kook for sure.
You ever seen the compilation of her making crazy eyes?
No.
There's a video of her making demon eyes, and every time she makes the eyes, the music.
Now, if you've been anywhere near the story, you've definitely seen the clips Joe is talking about. And this is where things take a turn from strange to genuinely unsettling. Because no matter how many times you replay it, slow it down, zoom in, there's just no clean, rational explanation for what Erika is doing with her eyes. It's not subtle. It's not something you can brush off as nothing. So what is it? A nervous tic that slips out under pressure? Bad acting that accidentally crossed into something eerie? Or something far more disturbing, something people don't even feel comfortable saying out loud? Some are calling it psychological. Others are calling it calculated. And then there are those who believe it's something much darker, like a glitch in a persona that isn't entirely real to begin with. That's where the theories spiral. Because once you notice it, you can't unsee it. And suddenly, every appearance she's ever made starts to feel off. Like something isn't lining up beneath the surface. Like there's a version of her we're not supposed to notice, but it keeps slipping through anyway. You can debate the cause all day long. You can argue over what it means. But one thing becomes impossible to ignore. Whatever is happening there, that is not normal.
At our prayer, and we ask the Lord to protect us.
to the students,
unable to understand, really.
Okay, well, can you walk around in someone else's shoes?
Yes, I'll guard my words.
I don't know personally where I sit today with my drink.
And I was standing in the ticket line.
we'll meet for dinner.
No, of course. But we serve a just God. And I rest easy in knowing that He's sovereign, but He's just. So let the Lord handle that. Burn the city down. March in the streets.
And of God's merciful love.
Now, going back to Joe Rogan, he didn't just talk about Erika's eyes. He also brought up her alleged intelligence ties and those CIA promotional videos she appeared in. And as Joe pointed out, even if Erika was just hired as an actress, there has to be a deeper reason why they picked her. And that's when Joe said that word that Erika doesn't want anyone to mention.
Risk analysis, they hear what we're saying, but they don't want to take action.
Well, there are 18 critical infrastructures.
Very weird. She's doing a CIA informational video.
Weird.
An acting gig or is it something else?
Perhaps. Or, I bet even so, you're doing an
Yeah.
acting gig for the CIA. Who calls you for that?
Yeah.
You ever get one of those calls?
No.
No, I never got one of those calls.
My agent never hit me with that one.
Yeah. It's odd. Well, there's a lot of people that think that she was his handler.
Oh.
Now here's where things start getting even more intense. This whole handler theory, it didn't just appear out of nowhere. It's been quietly building momentum online, fueled by people digging deep into Erika's past and connecting dots most weren't supposed to see. But mention it around Erika, and everything changes. Because sources are saying she doesn't just deny being called Charlie's handler, she reacts to it. Strongly. Emotionally. Almost like that label hits a nerve she can't control. And now it gets even wilder. There are claims that she actually tried to pressure Joe Rogan into editing his own episode, specifically to remove the part where he called her a handler. Insiders allege her team reached out behind the scenes, not just to complain, but to push back hard. And then came the part that really raised eyebrows. According to those same insiders, there were veiled warnings, the kind that don't sound like threats on the surface, but carry a message loud and clear. The implication? If Joe keeps talking, everything he's built could be at risk. And that's when the tone of this entire situation shifts. Because for Erika to believe she can intimidate someone like Joe Rogan, someone with one of the largest platforms on the planet, it suggests something bigger is at play. People don't make moves like that unless they think they have leverage. Real leverage. Which only makes one thing clear. She's not just trying to respond, she's trying to control the narrative. And that desperation? It's starting to show. Even Candace Owens couldn't stay quiet. When a paid voice on X tried to frame Joe as evil for supposedly mocking Erika, Candace fired back with zero hesitation, calling out the pattern directly, pointing to Erika's behavior, her demeanor, her history, and questioning why stating the obvious suddenly triggers legal threats. Because that's the real tension here. Why silence it if there's nothing to hide? And this is exactly why Joe continues to dominate the space. His conversations don't feel scripted. They don't feel controlled. They mirror what everyday people are already thinking, just said out loud, without filters. Spend even a few minutes online lately, and you'll see it everywhere. The same questions. The same unease. The same sense that something about Erika just doesn't add up. Candace doubled down on that point after reacting to Joe's episode with Mark Normand on her own podcast. And according to her, the reason Erika and even organizations like Turning Point USA seem to be spiraling right now is simple. They've lost control of the narrative. And the moment that happened was the moment the biggest podcaster in the world said out loud what millions of people had already been thinking.
Adding more to the Israel firsters' frustrations is the fact that everybody can see that something's not right with Turning Point USA and Erika Kirk, and that includes the biggest podcaster in the world, Joe Rogan. They were so angry because he went on his show and just kind of...
Candace also touched on the whole CIA angle, and she pointed out how Erika and Turning Point tried to gaslight everyone about those videos.
He addressed particularly the CIA documentary because they came out and they were suddenly trying to gaslight us and were, well, the CIA didn't produce the documentary. Okay, yes, but the head of the CIA is in it. Okay, you gotta get approval from the CIA to be in a CIA documentary. That doesn't just happen casually. Like he says, are you getting that phone call from your agent? And no, she's not acting. She's specifically referring to her mother's business model, EMPs. So she's not acting. She's involved. And so people, of course, online were so angry about it. The Israel firsters, Mark Levin, tweeted this. Is this some AI production? If not, what a total disgrace. Then this Eitan Fishberger said, this is some sick stuff from Joe Rogan, as if Erika hasn't been through enough already. How about just acknowledging that you do not have the power to transform reality?
Candace didn't stop there. She took things even further into territory that sounds less like a controversy and more like the opening scene of a covert operation. According to Candace Owens, there are claims that both the CIA and Army intelligence were allegedly involved in building the very environment that shaped Erika from childhood. And if that's even partially true, it completely reframes everything people think they know about her. Because now the question isn't just who is Erika today, it's what was she trained to become? Candace pointed directly to a place most people had never even heard of, the Tesseract School in Arizona. But here's where it gets eerie. That school didn't always go by that name. It was originally called the Looking Glass School. And that name alone is enough to set off alarm bells. Because Looking Glass isn't just some random phrase, it's long been tied, at least in whispers and speculation, to alleged intelligence programs like Project Looking Glass. The kind of name that doesn't just appear by coincidence, or at least, that's what people online are starting to believe. But the deeper you go, the stranger it gets. This wasn't your typical private school with uniforms and report cards. It was described as an experimental model of education, something designed and shaped by psychologists. And one of the key figures behind it? Someone incredibly close to Erika's own family circle, her father's first wife, Dr. Jerry France. So now you have a highly unconventional school, built on psychological frameworks, connected to individuals within Erika's inner orbit, and allegedly tied, at least in theory, to intelligence-linked concepts. And that's where Candace drops the thought that really shifts everything. She doesn't claim it outright, but she raises the possibility. What if this wasn't just education? What if it was conditioning? What if programs like this weren't about teaching in the traditional sense, but about shaping behavior, building personas, training responses? Because when you start looking at it through that lens, it begins to resemble something far more strategic. Something that echoes the kind of operations people associate with MKUltra, style experiments, controlled environments, psychological influence, long-term behavioral design. And suddenly, Erika's story doesn't feel random anymore. It feels constructed.
We have learned is backed financially by the Bush family, the Walton family, a model that's been designed by psychologists alongside Dr. Franz Feinstein. I mean, what could possibly go wrong?
Interview 7:25/7:39. But that's not all. Who was moving up the administrative ranks at Tesseract while Erika was a student? A woman named Nancy Gerard. And Nancy wasn't just a typical educator. She came from a deeply military and intelligence-connected background. Her father, Colonel Paul Tracy Gerard, served as the chief military law enforcement officer for the 7th Army in Stuttgart, Germany, and was also a high-ranking Freemason affiliated with the Scottish Rite in the Blue Lodge.
Tesseract had a principal who'd actually climb the ladder at Tesseract while Erika was a student, who had very strong military ties. A woman named Nancy Gerard Hall, she will become. Nancy was a military brat. Her father was Colonel Paul Tracy Gerard, who was a member of the Scottish Rite. A lot of that going on, a lot of Freemasonry going on at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, out in Kansas. He was a part of the Blue Lodge.
And then there's the family background, the kind of detail that, on its own, might seem ordinary, until you start stacking it with everything else. Reports point to connections that lean heavily toward military structure and discipline. A brother tied to an elite honor society like Scabbard and Blade. A first husband who served as an Air Force lieutenant. Individually, these are just facts. But together, they begin to form a pattern, one that feels less coincidental the longer you stare at it. And this is exactly where Candace Owens raises a question that refuses to go away. What if this wasn't just a life path, but a carefully shaped trajectory? Because when you combine those ties with an unconventional, psychologically driven education, it starts to resemble something far more intentional, almost like a system designed with precision. The kind you'd expect from military-style development programs meant to shape future assets. Then comes the piece that pushes everything into even murkier territory. In August 1990, Dr. Jerry France reportedly organized a trip to Eastern Europe. The official explanation? Academic research. A group of students from Radford University traveling abroad to study gender roles and expectations. On paper, it sounds harmless. But the timing is impossible to ignore. This was right after the fall of the Berlin Wall, a moment when entire political systems were collapsing, borders were shifting, and Eastern Europe was thrown into chaos. Governments were unstable. Populations were in flux. Entire regions were unpredictable. And in the middle of all that, we're supposed to believe this trip was purely about studying feminism? That's the part that doesn't sit right. Because, as Candace points out, moments of global instability have historically created the perfect cover. Not just for research, but for operations that don't belong in textbooks. Times when people move, disappear, or get reassigned, and no one asks too many questions because everything already feels uncertain. So when you look back at that trip through that lens, it stops feeling academic and starts feeling strategic. And then there's Romania. Years later, Erika is linked to work in an orphanage there, a detail that might seem compassionate on the surface. But when you connect it to earlier Eastern European involvement, it begins to echo something deeper. Something that raises uncomfortable possibilities about what was really happening behind the scenes and whether humanitarian efforts were masking something far more complex. At that point, the questions stop being hypothetical. They become unavoidable. Because now you have a timeline filled with overlapping patterns, military ties, psychological frameworks, geopolitical hotspots, and carefully placed narratives. Which leads to the question that changes everything. Was any of this random? Or was Erika placed exactly where she needed to be long before anyone ever noticed? Even her first meeting with Charlie, that chance encounter at the airport during what was described as a spiritual pilgrimage, starts to feel different when you look at it through this lens. Was it really an accident? Or just another moment in a script that had already been written? Because the truth is, the image she presented while Charlie was alive, that polished, traditional persona, doesn't quite align with the complexity of her past. And when the story doesn't add up, you don't ignore it. You question it. After all, that's exactly what Charlie always told people to do.